Thank you.
Views from the FCA.
Sorry, I've gone for some more traditional slides rather than just speaking. Happy New Year to everyone. Seems that is the approach to take, so Happy New Year. Thank you to QED for asking me to speak today. I'm going to give you a bit of a perspective on what we've learned about the RegTech market and some of our activities to date to try and encourage the development and adoption of RegTech solutions into financial services. Start with a definition. There's a slightly different definition on our website. This is a slightly more plain English version of the definition. But broadly, we see RegTech as being the use of technology to assist firms to understand and meet regulatory requirements. We're interested in this. This is part of a broader innovation focus for us as a regulator. Our Innovation Hub and our Project Innovate are fairly well known, hopefully to some extent in this room. Started a couple of years ago with two main aims really. One was to encourage innovation in the interest of consumers. That's very important. And the second, we, as well as being a conduct and a prudential regulator, we also have a competition objective, which makes us quite unique in comparison to many other regulators. But our innovation, interest and activities tie into this competition objective. We're looking to promote competition in the interest of consumers, and we're looking to promote the use of disruptive innovation and technology to achieve that competition. So this is kind of the anchoring of our innovation work. And we have various strands to this, one of which is RegTech. The others, which have briefly been mentioned to some degree, are things like our Sandbox initiative, where firms can test new ideas, new business models, new approaches. Importantly, pick up an earlier comment, not just startup firms, but established players in the market can access that sandbox as well. We have our Innovation Hub, which is more focused on firms that want to become authorised, but perhaps are doing something slightly unusual, something slightly different, or perhaps don't understand the regulatory system, and we provide them some support to help them get through the authorisations process. We have RegTech, which I'll spend most of the rest of my opening remarks talking about. And we have a couple of other angles. One is our advice unit, which focuses very much on sort of robo-advice, automated advice offerings, technology-supported advice offerings. And then we have a very strong focus on international cooperation. We've signed various agreements with regulators around the world where we recommend innovative businesses to one another. We're trying to get to a place where we can help small businesses and others grow at scale internationally. So we think it's very important that we play a role as in the international community in supporting that. So we started our RegTech work about 18 months ago, and to be honest, our initial focus was on trying to understand the RegTech market. We are a financial services regulator, we are not a technology regulator, and so initially we spent probably most of the first year listening to the market, talking to market participants, meeting a range of startups, large technology providers, regulated firms, consultancies, academics, various others, to try and understand what is RegTech, what are the barriers that might exist for RegTech adoption and development, and what role should we play. We don't have limitless resources, careful, and we equally need to make sure that our role that we play adds some value into the market and that we're not stifling innovation, we're not having the complete opposite effect of the effect that we would like. So we spent quite a lot of time listening. We published calls for input, got hundreds of responses to that, which was really useful. I'm going to take you a little bit through some of what we found from our engagement to date. Alongside this engagement, the other main thing that we've done over the last year have been a couple of tech sprints. In the fintech industry, these are normally called hackathons. They are sort of two-day, in our case, two-day events where we bring together a group of participants, and they can range from small to large technology companies, consultancies, regulated firms, other regulators, and we present a series of challenges and problems that we think are either driving inefficiency or cost in financial services. And we encourage the groups to come together to collaborate to try and design prototype technologies to meet these challenges and issues. And we see this as a very important role for us to play in catalysing and convening groups to come together and work together. And I think it ties into some of the earlier points about experimentation. we can learn through bringing groups together. We can see how the collaboration is working. We can see some of the new technologies, and we can make some judgments ourselves on whether we think these are things that we could adopt, whether we think these are things that should be taken forward in the market, and we can increase the visibility for the market of some of these ideas and technologies. So we've done 2 of these to date. The first was focused on addressing some issues that we saw around unbanked consumers or underbanked consumers and those that couldn't access financial services, in many cases because they couldn't verify their identity. So these are consumers who either don't have a credit history, don't have the standard government-approved identification documents or other forms of ID, and therefore struggle to get basic banking services. There are a lot of technologies out there now around biometrics, around alternative credit scoring systems, around different shared utilities for ID and KYC information, and we were looking at how might these help some of these unbanked consumers. The second one was probably more cleanly within a RegTech focus. This was around reg reporting. It's been mentioned a few times already. We know the industry struggles with the complexity and cost of regulatory reporting. We also know there are a lot of technologies that are coming forward and that are available to help them do that more efficiently. We also know that in many cases firms don't realise competitive advantage from how they do reg reporting, and yet they do it in isolation. So the idea of the second tech sprint was to bring them together to look at how might regulatory reporting and the provision of information to the regulator be done more efficiently. So that was our second event. There's lots more about both of these on our website, but I'm going to try and whistle through these opening comments. So what have we learned? We've learned quite a lot about how complex the RegTech ecosystem or market is, as well as having the kind of institutions and participants that we would recognise as a regulator. We've also had to try and understand what is an incubator, what is an accelerator, what is the role of different investment vehicles, how do the technology companies collaborate or not, do they have trade bodies in the way that we see in financial services, and trying to get a bit of an understanding of how does the ecosystem come together, what are the different participants. And this is important to us because we need to work out what role we should play. And if we don't understand the existing ecosystem, it's very difficult to know where we can add value. So we've done quite a lot to try and understand this, to make relationships, to build bridges with different parts of that ecosystem. And we've also sought to learn quite a bit about the different types of technology that are available or coming to the fore. And we sought to group these into effectively 4 groups. The first is those technologies that help information sharing and the provision of information between different entities. And we see lots of different alternative reporting mechanisms coming through, new shared utilities, online collaboration platforms, all sorts of different technologies in that space. And they're very much about efficiency and collaboration. We then see a lot of technologies that try and narrow the gap between the intention of a regulation, the interpretation of the regulation, and the implementation of the regulation. So we and other regulators try and write regulations and rules in ways that are understandable and clear and in plain English wherever possible, but we know that firms interpret them differently. We know that firms spend lots of money interpreting them differently, and we know that they implement them at sometimes very significant cost. And there's a lot of technologies that now exist to try and aid that interpretation, to help firms understand the nuances between different regulations, the overlap between different regulations. And in this space, we see things like semantic technologies are really interesting, things like common data models, common domain models, growing use of APIs, consistent APIs, and then and also things like robo-handbooks, which really try and take rules and policy, interpret them into machine-readable code, and then make recommendations to consumers off the back of them. The third group we see, and this was mentioned by some of the earlier panelists, are those technologies that help firms understand and use their data. I would agree that a lot of the data that we receive as a regulator is used and should be used by firms. And sometimes it's been very difficult because the analytics technologies have not been of the required standard. But we see huge investment and huge interest in better data analytics technologies, use of AI and machine learning, cognitive systems. And we've seen some really interesting systems that combine both AI and machine learning with a solid understanding of behavioural psychology, so knitting together data science and behavioural science, and some really interesting trade surveillance and other systems that are built around those 2 ideas. And then the final one is a bit of a catch-all, and this is really saying there are technologies that could fundamentally change the way in which regulation is delivered generally. And in that group, we include things like DLT, we include fully machine-readable regulation. We've seen things like the application of biometrics, which was always used for security, now being used more for identification. So we're seeing both the adoption of established technologies into FS, but also some really interesting new technologies like DLT and others. We talked to lots of firms about what are the barriers to adoption, and I'm sure we'll pick this up more in the panel. There's a few on the screen. I'm conscious I'm going to run over 10 minutes, so I'm going to just pick a couple. One of them is the existing complexity in the system. So there's huge amounts of legacy infrastructure, there's huge complexity of legacy infrastructure, and integrating what in some cases are point solutions. So not all of the RegTech solutions are end-to-end solutions, some of them are very specific point solutions. Integrating those into a legacy estate can be very, very challenging, and not without risk. We also know that particularly smaller firms struggle even to get access to financial services firms, particularly larger players. In some cases, that's because those large institutions have preferred supplier agreements with existing technology companies, as you would expect. In some cases, it's because the startups don't have a track record. They don't come across as credible to the financial services firms. They've got a great technology, but they don't display sufficient understanding of regulation or finance in order to even get time with the decision makers at firms. So we know access is an issue for particularly some of the smaller innovators. We also know that there is a thirst for greater clarity on what regulators expect from technology. And we have, like other regulators, we adopt a technology agnostic or technology neutral stance. But we know that firms won't experiment with innovative technology unless they have some confidence or some comfort that we will not beat them for it, not attack them for it, not hold it against them, that we will encourage them to be innovative. So this is a really tricky ground for us to make progress in, and we cannot prefer certain technologies over another. That's anti-competitive for us. We cannot reduce or remove the liability for ensuring proper compliance from firms. It's firms' responsibility to be compliant. But we do need to try and do something to help firms understand what does good practice look like in terms of adopting new technology. We do need to do something to work with standards bodies and others to help firms make some progress here. So there are a couple of the barriers. We'll talk about some of the others in the panel. We also asked quite a bit about what our role should be. And I mentioned earlier that there's an established ecosystem. We need to think where we fit in. One of them, as I mentioned, was playing some sort of role in helping with best practice and standards. A lot of the firms and institutions and innovators we talk to highlight that we have convening authority as a regulator. We can bring groups together in ways that many other market participants can't. And that is one of our, I guess, unique selling points or unique offerings, is that we have convening authority. And so that is a role that we have taken quite seriously through things like our hackathons, our tech sprints, acknowledging that we can get people in a room to collaborate and work on a shared problem in a way that sometimes the industry can't do itself. Sometimes it does, sometimes it can't. We've had a lot of interest in whether we would certify technologies or give some sort of seal of approval to technologies. The short answer is no. But we need to find ways in which firms can gain confidence that a technology is appropriate and reasonable. And this is an area where we've seen a lot of consultancy businesses, particularly those that perhaps fear automation and fear that they may lose some business through new technology adoption. We're seeing a number of consultancy businesses looking at certification. What role might they play in assuring technologies for financial services firms? And then the final role that's often highlighted to us is lead by example. Do some experiments yourself, trial some things, adopt new technologies yourself. Don't just leave it to financial services firms to do it. Don't expect people to do things you wouldn't do. So I think this is an area where we've taken, again, quite seriously, and we are looking at new technologies, both for our own analytics needs, new technologies for our own regulatory reporting needs, looking at can we make our handbook and rules machine readable. So we are taking this obligation or suggestion seriously. Final slide. We have to focus. So I don't have an enormous team on RegTech. and it is part of our broader regulatory role. So we have to pick some themes to focus on, and we have to pick a range of engagement mechanisms and approaches that enables me to leverage a relatively small team but try and have some influence and impact in the market. So these are the kind of activities that we are undertaking and will undertake. I've mentioned tech sprints. Tech talks are, if not that dissimilar to this kind of event, bringing groups together to discuss an issue, raising visibility of a problem, helping technology firms understand the challenge so that they can then go away and work on a solution. Tech shows or sort of more networking focused events, we know that startups don't like to share IP with other firms. We know that. What we know startups want is access to financial services firms. We know who the financial services firms are. We can get them into a room. We can also get the startups present. So there's something for us to do in how do we build this network where innovators and those that have problems and issues to solve can come together, can meet in an area where they don't lose IP, where they're not under threat, where they get access perhaps for a few minutes. They may not get an hour and a half with the chief technology officer at a major firm, but in a networking event, they might get 10 minutes to make a good impression. So we're looking at what can we do to try and kind of grow this network. Yeah, I'll wrap up then. We'll come to the rest in time. The bottom lines, you've got the slides. The bottom lines are the kind of areas of RegTech that we're focusing on. The blocks across the top are the kind of activities that we're undertaking. Most of them are hopefully reasonably self-explanatory. I will leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you.